Good morning, and I have to excuse my accent. I'm a Canadian. I hope you're okay with that. My mother's okay with it, so you should be okay with it. Anyway, just a couple weeks ago, we were in Australia at a conference similar to this. This is a worldwide issue. This is something that's coming at us. It's the big pressure that's coming at all of our nations. In Canada, it's very sadly been something that is sadly going the wrong direction. But I have a presentation for you, and I'm going to have to get right to it because of our time, and so that's what I'm going to do. For your information, by working with HOPE, by working with Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, because we work directly together, we're an international organization that works together. So we have resources that go right across the globe, and what's important about that is when things are happening, we have the instant information that we have together, that we share together. It's a way of being effective by always having the experts that you're working with. Kevin mentioned about euthanasia, so I'm quickly going to mention the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide. Euthanasia is when somebody would kill you. It's direct, it's intentional. In all our common law countries, it is viewed as a form of homicide because someone is killing you. It's not accidental. It's not unintentional, right? In the case of assisted suicide, it's a little different, but when he said there are two of the feathers that flock together, that's exactly it. When you legalize assisted suicide, you'll always get a little euthanasia with it. Assisted suicide is when someone's assisting you. They're directly involved in you causing your own death. So what is the law protecting you from? The law is protecting you from somebody else being involved with causing your death. And that's where the whole issue comes together. So I'm going to tell you a few stories. The first one is this one from Belgium. These were men, you might have noticed it in your newspapers. I don't know if it was covered here in Ireland. But Markin and Eddie were men who were born deaf. They were identical twins who lived their whole life together. They seemed to have a happy life. They were certainly, the stories about them, they were always together. And they were going blind, so they had macular degeneration. They were going blind, and they decided that going blind was a too great a level of suffering, and they died by euthanasia. Now you would say, were they physically ill? They were not physically ill. They died because they said going blind was too great a level of psychological suffering. And in Belgium and the Netherlands, and sadly with our recent court case in Canada, they define euthanasia as being for people going through physical or psychological suffering. Now, first of all, none of you can define psychological suffering. I certainly can't, and I've been in this issue for a very long time. And in October 2013, there was a case of a woman in the Netherlands, and we have Hank here who's from the Netherlands, so he'll understand this one a little bit. She had an obsession with cleanliness. And here she was not physically ill in any way. She was blind, or nearly blind. And she said the concept of blindness was too great a level of psychological suffering for her because of her obsession with cleanliness. She was afraid that she wouldn't be able to know if she was dirty or not. So she asked for euthanasia. For what reason? Psychological suffering. She said blindness would be too great a level of psychological suffering. Now this case was important because it was the very first case of someone who had no physical illness, who was but simply asked for euthanasia for a reason such as this, and it was granted to her, you would say. She died by euthanasia. And later on today, you're going to hear this Amy Hasbrook speak, and she's a friend of mine, and Amy was born blind. So I'm going to ask you the social consequences now. If euthanasia becomes a reason for blindness, how does that affect our attitude towards blind people? Right? Because death becomes... Now, let me put this together for you. The other side, and I'm going to do this now because it comes together with this story, but the other side says it's all about my choice, right? That's the argument. But let's think this through. The lady might have asked for euthanasia, that's correct, but it took 2 doctors and a psychiatrist to agree that her life was not worth living and to cause her death. So what it means is someone might ask for death. Now that's actually not new to the culture. There's many times people are going through a terrible time of their life and they might actually ask to die. That doesn't mean they want to die. That means they're going through a terrible time of their life. The difference is when you legalize this, someone else gains the right in law to actually cause your death. Right? This case I'm not going to talk about because we're going to have Tom with us later by Skype. It's the case of his mother. Here's a case out of Belgium. This really comes together even more. Anne had anorexia. She was going to this psychiatrist for her treatment. She claimed that he had convinced her through his treatment to establish a sexual relationship. She claimed that he had then sexually exploited her. She launched a case. And then what happened is that she said that the whole process of the situation of being sexually exploited, the complaint and the emotions around the complaint and everything about that was too great a level of psychological suffering. She asked for euthanasia. She died by euthanasia. Now, we all know she was suffering. No one's questioning that she was suffering. But what is the answer to suffering? Is it death? Of course, she asked for it. That's true. But somebody agreed that her life was not worth living and killed her. The doctor lost his medical license. We're going to talk a little bit about Oregon for a second. These are more stories. Why? Barbara Wagner, she had recurrent lung cancer. So she was in a situation where she had lung cancer, she went into remission, and it recurred, and it was very aggressive. So she was prescribed an aggressive form of medical treatment. And in Oregon, she had no, health insurance. She was dependent on the state health plan. So the Oregon State Health Plan turned her down for treatment. Now, that's one issue. But they offered her assisted suicide. So I say to you, is that all now about free choice? The other side says, it's all about my choice. When you're denied medical treatment, which is one issue, but you're offered assisted suicide, the point is, what is the state doing being involved with offering assisted suicide? Would that happen in Ireland? I know in Canada it's very likely to happen with our deficits and everything with our state health plan. And let's go further. Dr. Charles Brandts, he's a doctor in Oregon. Now this is important because people say, we would only do it if someone's really suffering. Well, Dr. Brandts had a patient, and it was a long-term patient of his, and he had diagnosed his patient with cancer, and his patient became very depressed. Now, is that new that someone might become depressed after being diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer? The answer is no. That's not new. What happened is that his patient became very depressed, so Dr. Brandts did what he was supposed to do. He referred his patient to the cancer specialist. The cancer specialist phones him up and says, will you be the second signature for the assisted suicide? And Dr. Brandts said, no, my patient is depressed. My patient needs care for his depression. He does not need assisted suicide. He doesn't qualify for assisted suicide in Oregon. His patient died by assisted suicide. So how does it work? They say to you, we'll have safeguards. This is what I hear all the time. Alex, we'll have safeguards. So they say, we'll make sure 2 doctors decide. Well, then they just do doctor shopping. The only mistake the first doctor made is not thinking that possibly the primary physician, Dr. Brandts, doesn't support assisted suicide. So the fact is that they just do doctor shopping. If one doctor says, no, my patient's depressed, they simply ask another doctor, and they say yes. So even his primary physician could not protect him. A primary physician who had recently seen him could not protect him. So once it's legal, where does it go? And this story really brings it together. This is the story of Jeannette Hall in Oregon. And Jeannette Hall had voted for assisted suicide. So just so you understand, in the state of Oregon, they had a plebiscite, a voter initiative, and that's how they legalized assisted suicide. And so what happened is Jeannette Hall had voted in favor of it. She wanted it. She was diagnosed with cancer in 2000. She did not want treatment. She said she did not want treatment. She did not want to suffer. She wanted assisted suicide. But her physician did not believe in assisted suicide. So she had asked for it, but her doctor didn't believe in it. So what did he do? He just basically said, I'll meet you once a week. So she came in for her appointment once a week, and he talked to her. And after a period of time, he had convinced her that maybe some treatment would be a good idea, and she went into remission. Now, the point of the story is not that everybody goes into remission. The point of the story is, as Jeannette Hall said, this is a letter she wrote in 2012. She's still alive today. There was a recent video that just came out about her. And she says, it's now 12 years later. If my doctor had believed in assisted suicide, I would be dead. Very important. The point of it is they say it's all my body, my choice. But the point is that, no, it's actually the physician's choice. In this case, the physician chose not to do it. And because the physician chose not to do it, she's alive today. And if you think that this would never happen, here's the case of Pietro, who's an Italian who was diagnosed with a terminal condition. He went to Switzerland for assisted suicide. He died by assisted suicide, and in his autopsy they found out he was not sick. Now, I know in Ireland your medical system would never misdiagnose anybody. But the fact of it is that when assisted suicide is legal or euthanasia is legal and you die, well, you cannot come back from that. It doesn't work that way. So if I were to receive a misdiagnosis, I might get bad medicine, something that couldn't help me, right? Something that might not be the best for me, but I wouldn't be dead. But once it's legal, that could be the end. How often does that happen? Well, how do you know? So let's look at a recent study, and I'm going to give you, this is a bit of information, but it's very important. This study just came out. You see, it was published on March 19th, 2015. That's very recent. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. This is actually a repeat study. The original studies were done in 2007 and published in 2010, and then they did a repeat of the same study that just came out. And this study looked at more than that, but they had 3,751 deaths that they had information for to analyze. There's 61,000 total deaths in the Flanders region of Belgium in the year 2013. So what that study looked at is it looked at 3,751 deaths. They found 4.6% of all the deaths in Flanders, Belgium were euthanasia. Well, that's significant. But what's more significant, they found that 1.7% of all the deaths were hastened without request. So what you have is a situation in a culture that when euthanasia is legal, you actually also get a little bit of hastening without request. Why? Because physicians become more used to causing death. What does that mean? That means that in Flanders, that's the Flanders region, it's not all of Belgium, you had over 1,000 deaths in 2013, if you do the number calculating, without request. That's significant. That's massive. That's a culture that is very concerning. What even goes further is the study said there was 4.6% of all euthanasia, all deaths were euthanasia. But if you look at the actual government stats, reported euthanasia deaths, there were 1,454 reported euthanasia deaths. That meant, if you do the math, almost half of all euthanasia deaths were never reported. That's what it means. They never reported them. And now they say to you, but we will have safeguards. They will say to you, why are you going to infringe upon my right to die? We'll have safeguards to protect you. And yet you see in Belgium, the practice of it is not like that at all. People die without request, and they don't report it. So there's a 2007 study, it showed very similar issues. The 2007 study showed 1.8% of all deaths were hastened without request. So in fact, over a period of time, even though they did these massive research studies on death studies, the issue has not improved. It stays the same. So the same number of deaths without request has been occurring. And you see also deaths without request is then a situation. Who were they? When we look at the data, who were the ones who died without request? Well, they tended to be people who lived in the hospital, predominantly. They tended to be approximately 80 years of age, on average. And they tended to have either coma or dementia. They were incompetent. So the point of it is that they never asked for it, and the law requires you to actually ask for it. So because they never asked for it, what happens? They cause your death without request, then they never report it. Why do they not report it? Because obviously you don't want to report, which is technically illegal. So let's be very clear about this. How do these laws work? Because everyone who's in favor of this, they always throw at you the theory, or they throw at you the hard story. There's lots of hard stories out there. We understand in the human condition, suffering occurs. That's true. So that's what they throw at you. But when we look at the theory and then we go to the practice of it is a different story. The practice of it is a situation where people are in a vulnerable condition. So why would you consider death? It's because you're in a vulnerable condition. And all of us at one time in our life might end up in that vulnerable condition. And what happens then is that if they cause your death, the laws work that they have to report it. So the other side says, but Alex, this is just so you understand how this works. The other side says, Alex, there isn't any data showing abuse under the reported euthanasia deaths. Well, first of all, how do they get the data? The data comes from the doctors who did the death. So how it works in the Netherlands and Belgium and Oregon, Washington State, is the doctor who does the death has to send in the report. So I killed you, and now I have to send in a report. So is it likely that I'm going to send in a report saying my patient was totally depressed but completely healthy? Is it possible that I'm going to send in a report saying my patient never asked for it, but I thought they should have it? Of course not. And in fact, when those are the conditions, they usually just don't send in the report. So you get this whole situation. And I'm being told about the time. And just so you go even one further, the study in 2007 with the nurses actually showed the same data. So now there was a study they did in 2007 where they actually interviewed nurses. And so you have two separate groups of interviews and data, and it shows the same thing. The nurses found in their study that 45% of all the euthanasia deaths were done without request. So you have the same data. And it showed also that they tended to be on 80 years or older on average. 14 of the cases, the nurses admitted to doing it. So, because we have no time, I'm just going to say to you a few things. And then later we can go over this further. In 2013, I debated a guy named Jan Bernheim. He's a guru of euthanasia, one of the founders, pioneers of euthanasia in Belgium. You have a few sort of pioneer pushers here in Ireland of euthanasia. And I debated him, and and Kevin was there, and a few others here were there. And I went through a lot of the data of what's going on in Belgium, and he never questioned that because he knew the data. So in a debate format, he does his thing, I do my thing, and then we get to respond. And his response to me was, oh, there are problems with the Belgian euthanasia law. And I responded, because my mic was on, and I said, that is cold comfort for the dead. Because that's what we're talking about here. They say it's all about my body, my choice. The reality is when you legalize this, what happens is you've actually given the power to the physician to cause your death. Right? That's what you're actually doing. They actually then have power over your life. Power that they shouldn't have. Okay? That's how it actually works. Theory, practice. The practice is it's not safe. Now that's why I have my t-shirts here. So anyway, if you want a bit more information, I do have my books at the back, and you can purchase them, and I have a few newsletters and things, and I'm really happy you're here. And if you want to email me or join my Facebook page, it's a good thing to do, because then you can get involved more, and I'm sure Kevin's going to be doing the same thing, asking you to be involved with that, and that's exactly how we work in Coalition worldwide. Thank you very much.